The average American's annual sugar intake has skyrocketed from less than 10 pounds in the late 1800s to more than 100 pounds today. And that increase has come with a cost. Studies have linked excess sugar consumption to numerous health problems, including obesity and type 2 diabetes. Artificial sugar is an option to substitute for sugar, but its intake may not be so impressive in weight because such little amount is required to actually make a sweet taste. But the question is, are they good for you? Let's discuss some of the research in the recommendations. In this webinar, you will learn about artificial sugars, what the experts say, and the terminology used for safe limits, research specific for sweeteners as a whole group, and the effects on diabetes, and the science behind the impact of artificial sweeteners. And I will discuss the theoretical problems, as well as the pros and the cons. Global health organizations, including the American Heart Association, the American Diabetes Association, and the British Dietitian Association, have deemed that the use of low or no-calorie sweeteners can be helpful for people with diabetes because they do not raise blood glucose or insulin levels, and they recommend them when used to replace sugar so that they can lower carbohydrate intake. Moreover, general consensus among dietitians is, as I quote, "People with diabetes and those at risk are advised to avoid sugar-sweetened beverages, including fruit juices, in order to control glycemia and weight, and to reduce the risk for cardiovascular disease, fatty liver, and should minimize the consumption of foods with added sugar that have the capacity to displace healthier, more nutrient-dense food choices." Well, that's easier said than done, dietitians. So, from all the dietitians that I have counseled with in my local area of Wichita, Kansas, artificial sweeteners are generally accepted as an okay way to bridge the gap for people who are craving sweets when they are stopping the foods with the added sugars. So your question may be, is this strategy to displace the real sugar with artificial sugar a good recommendation? And what are the effects? In May of 2020, a Cochrane System Review published a review of 9 randomized controlled trials for non-nutritive sweeteners, meaning that artificial sweeteners were Splenda, aspartame, etc. That review supports my own personal research. And the results were that the studies are mixed. The evidence is inconclusive. It's inclusive for either benefit or harm. Well, that may not answer your question. So in this webinar, I put the research for the artificial sugars into the courtroom. And I will bring forth the main points of the evidence about the artificial sweeteners as a group. And in the other webinar about artificial sweetener types, I discuss each artificial sugar individually. So, I feel that it is important to first review some of the basic terminology. The Food and Drug Administration has coined certain terms to say that food ingredients may be safe or meet high food standards. One term is ADI. ADI stands for Acceptable Daily Intake, which is the daily average intake over a lifetime that is expected to be safe based on significant research. It is found by determining the highest intake level found to have no adverse effects in lifetime studies in animal models. The amount is then divided by a safety factor to determine the ADI. It is a conservative number that the vast majority of people will not reach. The ADI is used to determine the safety of any new food ingredient, and it is not specific just to artificial sweeteners. Another term to learn is GRAS, which stands for Generally Recognized as Safe Ingredients. The GRAS category must meet one of the two conditions. a history of safe use established by a significant number of people consuming it prior to the Act in 1958. Or there must be scientific data about the safety and the use of the ingredient in widely known scientific articles and position papers, and have a good standing with expert opinion. And that's it for the terminology. Now let's discuss a chart of the scientific testing of glycemic index, net carbohydrates, and carbohydrates for the non-nutritive sweeteners. Notice in this chart that each non-nutritive sweetener is in the same amount. Generally, all these products are suitable for decreasing the impact to low or no impact on your blood sugar. However, you must keep in mind that the blood sugar impact of each sweet substance does have a little bit of variation, and then there's also that factor of variation from person to person and how they metabolize things. More information will be discussed in the other video about non-nutritive sweeteners that is specific to each sweetener. For the next subject, let's move on to the effects of sweeteners on diabetes. Generally, people with diabetes want to consume foods with sweeteners in order to do two things: lessen the impact on the blood sugars and manage weight loss. A recent review of 29 randomized controlled trials, which included 741 people, 69 of which had type 2 diabetes, showed that artificial sweeteners on their own do not raise blood glucose levels. But keeping in mind that the content of the food or the drink containing the artificial sweetener must be considered, especially with people with diabetes when looking at these studies. All in all, the vast majority of research studies do support that non-nutritive zero-calorie sweeteners do not raise blood sugars. However, I am going to acknowledge that there are conflicting anecdotal reports by people with diabetes saying that artificial sweeteners did increase their blood sugars or do increase their blood sugars. Personally, I have diabetes and a completely non-functioning pancreas, and I have never personally experienced a blood sugar increase when eating artificial sweeteners with my diabetes. There are studies of people with and without diabetes that have shown that sugar alcohols can cause a little bit of a postprandial blood glucose response, but that it is less than that of sucrose or glucose. The glycemic index, as was listed, is 0, and it will vary from person to person. I personally have experienced blood sugar rises with erythritol, but technically on the glycemic index it's listed as 0. Monk fruit and other sugar alcohols are expected to raise the blood sugars, possibly a little bit, but all in all, it will be much slower and lesser. Next, I want to take a step back to the chart on the glycemic index because I want to explain a few of the specifics. Does anyone notice something different about the aspartame and saccharin on this chart? Does it confuse you that it says net carbs and total calories are equal to that of table sugar? Well, just like sugar, aspartame contains 4 calories per gram. However, because aspartame is much sweeter than sugar, very little is needed to sweeten foods or beverages to match the sweetness provided by sugar. So this keeps the calories contributed by aspartame very low per serving. It may also confuse you that if you look at a pack of artificial sweetener versus regular sugar in the little yellow and white packets, they look like the same amount. Well, that's because they bulk it up with other additives so they can match the volume and the flavor that sugar provides. So here's another one. Does anyone notice that sucralose has a glycemic index that says from 0 to 80? Well, that is due to the maltodextrin and the dextrose fillers that are often combined with sucralose or Splenda to bulk it up in packages. But even in its pure form, There is some speculation over whether or not sucralose affects blood sugar levels in people with existing insulin resistance. There was a small study of 17 severely obese participants with insulin resistance, and the blood sugar levels did increase by 14% and the insulin levels by 20%. But in those who consume it regularly, it didn't show a significant effect on either. Okay, now the chart will be gone. I would like to talk about soda pop. Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Mountain Dew Voltage. Is there any wonder as to why there are so many research studies about full sugar soda and diet soda? Soda is the chosen favorite in research because it is just sugar and water. And it's easily measurable. And it's easy to track in a person's diet because it comes in cans. And generally, each soda pop has about the same amount of sugar and the same type of sugar. Soda is also universally consumed, and it's available all over the world and consumed throughout all socioeconomic statuses. Before I quote any research studies, I want to give you a 2-sentence education on interpreting them. First, always read many articles. The best are peer-reviewed, and meta-analysis and systemic reviews are best. A gold standard is a randomized controlled trial to determine causal effect. However, most nutritional studies or soda studies are observational, and observational studies do not prove a cause-effect relationship. So that's my disclaimer. Now for the research studies about soda. It may not come to surprise you. A study posted in Diabetes Care found that people who drink 1 to 2 sugar-sweetened sodas every day have a risk of developing type 2 diabetes that is 26% higher than those who do not. Another study, called the Nurses' Health Study, explored this connection by following the health of more than 90,000 women for 8 years. The women who said that they had 1 or more servings a day of sugar-sweetened soft drinks or fruit punch were twice as likely to develop type 2 diabetes during the study than those who rarely had these beverages. Another study, a 2019 study, looked at 22 to 26 years worth of data, and from more than 192,000 men and women participating in 3 long-term studies: the Nurse Health Study, the Nurse Health Study 2, and the Health Professionals Follow-Up Study. It found that increasing total sugary beverage intake, including both sugar-sweetened beverages and 100% fruit juice, by more than 4 ounces per day over a 4-year period was associated with a 16% higher risk of type 2 diabetes in the following 4 years. As a caveat, the study also found that drinking more artificially sweetened beverages in place of sugary beverages did not appear to lessen the diabetes risk. However, replacing 1 daily serving of sugary beverage with water, coffee, or tea, unsweetened tea, was linked with a 2 to 10% lower risk of diabetes. Keep in mind that these are observational results and they do not prove a cause and effect relationship, but we can probably assume that diet soda is unlikely to be the best option for people looking to control or prevent type 2 diabetes. One recent study posted in Diabetes Care found a strong association between diet sodas and diabetes factors. In the study, researchers found a significant link between diet soda and the development of high blood sugars and body fat. These are 2 risk factors for metabolic syndrome. The results of the study showed a 67% increase in the risk of type 2 diabetes in people who drink diet soda daily. So I just quoted you studies that justify that sodas increase diabetes risk. But also, there are studies that indicate diet soda does and does not increase that risk. The research studies are mixed for diabetes risk. Likewise, the obesity risk research studies are also mixed. And this is confusing for people with diabetes as well, because many are trying to consume these artificial sweeteners to cut calories and to lose weight. There are many research studies to support that the artificial sweeteners do help with weight loss. And that would correlate with the unrefutable and basic science that less calories equals less weight gain. However, there are also studies that say the contrary. For an example, a study posted in the Journal of American Geriatric Society looked at the long-term effects of diet soda on belly fat. The study lasted 9.4 years and included a total of 749 participants over the age of 65. The participants who drank diet soda on a daily basis showed a nearly quadruple increase in the waist size versus those who did not drink it. This was an observational study, not randomized, not controlled, but consider that it was a long study with a lot of participants, and geriatrics is a good population because the activity level, the metabolism level, which greatly influence weight gain, are more matched at this age, and that's probably why this population was chosen, along with the fact that they're at higher risk for diabetes. One hypothesis is that people may compensate for the calorie-free choices by eating or drinking more calories in other foods or future meals. For a typical example, I can take myself, who will order a McDonald's number 1 meal with a Diet Coke. But it's really too hard to tell in a study because losing and maintaining weight requires multiple factors. Factors can be healthy foods, exercise, sleep, and etc. So making a single one change is just one factor. Ultimately, the reason for controlled diabetes and losing weight is to be healthier and to live longer. So I thought that I should be fair to present at least one study that looked at diet soda consumption and death. There was a study released in the JAMA Internal Medicine in 2019, and it was one of the largest of its kind. It tracked 451,743 men and women from 10 countries in Europe. The participants who drank 2 or more glasses of soft drinks per day had a higher risk of mortality than those who consumed less than 1 glass per month. The soft drinks included both sugar-sweetened and artificially sweetened beverages. To give just a little bit more detail, it found that the consumption of 2 or more glasses of artificially sweetened soft drinks per day was positively associated with deaths from circulatory diseases. For the sugar-sweetened soft drinks, 1 or more glasses per day, it was associated with deaths from digestive diseases, including diseases of the liver, appendix, pancreas, and intestines. With just one study quoted here, please do not interpret that I'm making the statement that diet soda causes death or that it's associated with death, because there have been hundreds of studies to establish safety. And if there were strong evidence and research in the field about this, then the FDA would be on top of that investigation and be changing its recommendations. The cancer concern is a more publicly feared issue among artificial sweeteners, and perhaps the most controversial and studied non-nutritive sweetener is aspartame. The main concern among the public and in the media has been regarding the cancer risk but that study actually resulted from a really old one done in rats. But 40 years and 200 studies conducted in humans and animals on the use of common levels of aspartame in food showed that the safety is considered to be there, and it does not suggest any long-term adverse effects. An adult weighing 60 kilograms or 132 pounds would have to consume over 12 cans of soda containing aspartame daily to reach the ADI of 40 milligrams per day. And that is lower than the ADI recommendation by the FDA of 50 milligrams per kilogram per day. Moreover, the American Cancer Society and the National Cancer Institute in the U.S. agree that no excessive link to increased cancer exists with the use of aspartame in food products at current levels. Also, the European Food Safety Authority recently conducted the most comprehensive review of available animal and human data, both published and unpublished, and concluded that in current levels of exposure, no safety issues were noted to be increased for the risk of cancer, gene, or neurological damage with aspartame. And I am not aware of any other substantial controversy for cancer in any other sweeteners. There's definitely not research on it right now, and is not really suspected. So for the last part of the webinar, I'd like to talk about some of the more interesting subjects, like the theoretical problems and pros and cons with artificial sweeteners. You may have heard them, and you're probably unclear about them. The most discussed theoretical problem with artificial sweeteners is, number one, do they stimulate appetite and cause you to eat more due to the taste receptors that exist in your mouth, gut, and brain? Some have concern that the sweetness activates the reward pathways in the brain, but without delivering the sugar to the body, and that this drives appetite and cravings without feeling satisfied. Another thing is that there's been discovery that taste receptors reside in parts of the bodies other than the oral cavity, like the gut and the pancreas, and that they play a role in nutrient sensing in the gut and the regulation of metabolic processes like insulin release. So the questions are curious, but not answered. Do non-nutritive sweeteners stimulate the brain's appetite or dysregulate metabolic processes due to the presence of taste receptors in those areas? The number two theoretical problem with artificial sweeteners is, do they negatively impact your gut biome in a way that may contribute to obesity or diabetes? The research on the microbiome contribution to obesity and diabetes is a burgeoning area. The question is not able to be answered because the research on the gut microbiome is still in its infancy. Therefore, there is not any substantial or solid evidence regarding the effect of artificial sweeteners on the microbiome. Although they are a food substance, and a change in foods in general does affect the microbiome. One example of an artificial sweetener is monk fruit. In monk fruit, the metabolism of moghrosides, which is the sweetness effect in monk fruit, is done by the microbiota of the gut. But there is not any research to show that its changes in the microbiome is bad or good. However, there is one known and fairly common side effect of non-nutritive sweeteners in the intestinal tract, and that is diarrhea. The risk for diarrhea is the number one reason why some people do not tolerate them. The cause of the diarrhea is that the artificial sweeteners are not processed or absorbed through the gut, so they continue to pass through and pull water in. The worst effects are seen in stevia and xylitol. If you get diarrhea and it's a problem, then the best choice is erythritol because the gut bacteria does not ferment it. Another tidbit is that the FODMAP diet for irritable bowel syndrome avoids sugar alcohols. So that's something to keep in mind as well. If I have not deflated your ideas about the artificial sweeteners too much, let's go over a couple of the highlights and pros that are found about them. The obvious pro is that they allow people with diabetes to enjoy sweetness without impacting blood sugars, and they don't add additional calories to the diet. There is plenty of research to support that they do help with weight loss, and that would correlate with the unrefutable and basic science that less calories equals less weight gain. If you've already watched the sugar addiction webinar, then you've already learned about the brain effects of sugar and the addictive release of certain neurotransmitters. Research has shown that artificial sweeteners do not induce the opioid withdrawal characteristics that sugar does. So that's a positive. Another positive is for the sweetener xylitol. Diabetes increases the risk for periodontitis. To improve dental health, some studies suggest the need for at least 5 to 6 grams and 3 exposures per day from chewing gum or candies with xylitol. Also, a recent review suggests that the effectiveness of xylitol on the prevention of dental cavities in children is uncertain, but that the doses of more than 4 grams per day have a greater effect. The American Academy of Pediatric Dentistry supports the use of xylitol and other sugar alcohols as non-cariogenic sugar substitutes. Last but not least, another possible positive finding is that erythritol acts as an antioxidant, and it may improve blood vessel function in people with type 2 diabetes. The study was called the Multi-Targeted Mechanisms Underlying the Endothelial Protective Effects of Diabetes-Safe Sweetener Erythritol. This study found the post-meal lowering of blood pressure, and this benefit may potentially reduce the risk of heart disease. But more studies are needed. There's only minor research, and none of it is considered level A evidence. This concludes the information for this webinar. So how about a summary? The experts recommend the use of non-nutritive sweeteners to lower caloric intake, and the safety has been established with ADI and GRAS. The diabetes and obesity research continues, and it waxes and wanes as to whether or not they're helpful. There are theoretical concerns, pros and cons, that have shed some light on. And with all this new information in mind, ultimately, the use of artificial sweeteners depends on your individual preference and how you would like to manage your diet. They can serve as a good transition from sugar, but of course, they need to be consumed in moderation. I recommend that you learn more about the food choices to transition to a more healthful diet in the Nutrition for Diabetes series. And also, I recommend that you attend the webinar in the Counting Carbohydrate series. These 3 webinars together are dynamite for comprehensive knowledge of all the important aspects for controlling your diabetes and losing weight with diet. Thank you for attending this webinar, and we'll see you in the next one.